Hello, career thought leaders. It's good to see you today. And we are going to be talking about ageism in resumes and beyond, ways that we can make sure that we are not playing into biases that our clients might face because of age. So, hi, Maria. Thanks for joining us. I love that little emoji. Hi, Gary. Thanks for joining us. And you work in an executive MBA program, Gary does. So, I'm guessing that you see this sometimes maybe on both sides of the spectrum, because although we are going to focus today on kind of the 45 plus job seeker, we also see young people struggle with this. And it's frustrating, right? That there's no perfect age. We've got jobs that are supposed to be entry level that are asking for 5 years of experience that can somewhat discriminate against our younger professionals who are just trying to get started. And then, of course, well-documented age challenges, age bias that starts around 40 years old, younger for women, a little older for men. Now, one of the things I want to just talk about before we go too far is that bias does not mean that we are not with our people. So sometimes people will say, oh, if the hiring team is older, they won't be biased. And that's not necessarily true. I like to bring up the study, some Harvard data that showed about 85% of people are biased against people who are overweight, which obviously means most people who are overweight are biased against other people who are overweight. So we've got to be thoughtful about the way that we think about this and position our clients, because it doesn't necessarily mean just because a hiring team might be older that they still don't have biases around age, because they're so prevalent in our society that even as we get older, we still have biases against other old people, right? Because they're old, I'm not. It's this very strange thing that we do as humans to make ourselves feel better, but then try to protect us from the bad things that we are socialized to believe about whatever other group it might be. So human brain, very interesting, fascinating thing, but it's also pretty predictable that we will have these biases, and we will almost have them again, no matter what age we are. May differ a little bit by country, but the Harvard research was quite global and showed kind of this global prevalence of bias, including age bias. So what do we do for our clients that are in this age range, which is probably most of them 40 plus when we're talking about private career counseling or career coaching business, resume writing business. And then, obviously, even going back to the university and maybe working with alumni, you see people that are in this age group. So how do we help them and go through the resume, their messaging, all of that? So one of the things that we used to hear is that you don't want to include any more than 10 years of experience on your resume. When I first started resume writing, that was one of the things that people said, hide their age by only putting on 10 years. But what I found was a couple of things. One, it felt weird to only have 10, 15 years of experience on a resume for someone who's 60. And then they walk into the interview and they're obviously not 35 or 40, which 10 or 15 years on their resume would suggest. Now, someone on my LinkedIn said, they wouldn't see it as a sign of mistrust. And it's maybe trust is the wrong word, but it's just not authentic. It's not congruent. And I might assume that you've got more than that, but it's just putting a lot out there that we don't necessarily have to, because there are some creative ways that we can share old experience on a resume without having to leave that huge gap that makes it weird, or put every single date that lets you calculate exactly my age. Hi, Barry. Good to see you. No, this is a popular topic. So feel free to drop your thoughts around age or your questions around it. As we go along, I'm going to show some examples as well. So before we get into the specifics around resumes, it's one big piece of this is that we have to stay current in what's going on in our industry. And I remember when I first started, again, I would give this presentation and I talk to people about what is the technology that you're using, and in-person interviews used to be more prevalent. And what is the technology that you're carrying with you in that interview? How are you showing up that shows me whether or not you are current in your industry? And this we want to think about now, even more and more, in terms of our digital presence. And what does it look like when I look for you online? How engaged are you? How involved are you? Where are you positioning yourself? How does that align with what's going on in your industry? Because not every industry uses every platform. So I'm not saying you have to be on certain things or not. But then also, how are you talking about technology in your posts, in your conversations? Things have shifted a little bit, but I remember when I was first starting to talk about this topic, and some people would say, well, I'm not on Facebook. And even that term, with the right intonation combined with obviously looking a little bit older, came across as being behind in technology. You're worried about certain things that not people younger than you aren't worried about. Now it's kind of in vogue not to be on Facebook. So that's part of the challenge, right? As a professional, is staying up on the trends, what's going on, what's the chatter in your industry, what types of technologies are they talking about, and making sure that we're aligning with that. What's the lingo? How are people talking? I saw a funny meme today that said that the Gen or the millennial sales manager was excited because they'd used their Urban Dictionary to coach their Gen Z sales candidate or sales person, and now they didn't feel old. And that we don't want to go too far, because when you try too hard, it can kind of backfire. But you do want to pay attention to what's going on in your industry. What are the common topics, and what type of language are people talking about when they're discussing that? So that's the first thing, kind of, is this big picture brand of how do I show up? How do I engage? How do you see me online? Because that's all going to happen perhaps before someone sees your resume. If not before, immediately after they see their resume, they're going to go online and find you and want to see that you are connected to the industry, that you're using the right information, that you're using the platforms, that you're having conversations, that you're engaged. And this is one of the ways I think it's easy for people to show and build relationships across any bias, is to get involved in those communities and have those conversations. Even better when you're talking about age bias, because then you've got that information that you can share, but you're not just sharing it, you're living it. One of our students, a career coach that took one of our classes recently, talking about interview coaching, and she said at the end of the interview, she was asked, what did she know about the current technologies in student services, in career services? And it kind of took her aback, because she realized with that question that that's an ageism question, right? Would that person have asked a younger candidate about the technologies? So she kind of had to calm herself down and then answer the question, but she felt like she probably had a little edge while she was answering the question, because it pissed her off, right? The question. So that's one of the things I love to do with my clients, and we teach coaches to do, is ask your client, what are the assumptions that people have around X? And you can use this for many different types of bias. If the client brings it up and is nervous that this type of bias might play into their job search, or okay, let's get it down on the table. So what are some of the biases people might have against older candidates? What are their stereotypes? What are their automatic thoughts that they're going to be putting out on you, that we can think about first? Technology. All right, let's be ready to answer that question. They might be worried about, your energy level. They might be worried about your commitment. How long are you going to be there? So we can brainstorm out those things that we see, we know, we just got to be real, and we can put them all out on the table and say, okay, these are the things they're going to be concerned about. Once we have that, then we can prepare for our interview, for our resume, LinkedIn profile, whatever it might be, to one, make sure we don't play into that bias by being outdated in our technology, or saying something or having a phrase or whatever, or two, that we could actually specifically address it, maybe in our resume, maybe in the interview. For this student of ours, if that had been even more prevalent in her resume, perhaps the question wouldn't have come up, or she at least would have been prepared for it when it gets asked. So thinking about what those biases might be, being real, brainstorming them, and then saying, okay, how can we make sure we don't play into those, maybe by accident? And then how can we make sure that we speak to them directly when at all possible, throughout our resume, throughout our profile, in our interview answers, all of those things. And building those relationships so that it diffuses the bias as much as possible before we get there. So what other things are you doing with clients on that realm? And then we're going to jump into some resume specific instances of what we want to do. Number one thing that I see on the first line of many resumes is X years of experience. I don't even care what X is. The number is not the problem. The X years of experience is an old school way of communicating. And right away, it shows me that you have seen, probably not even really thinking through it, but you've seen years of experience be a qualifier. And when we think about it, it really isn't. No one's asking for someone with 20 years of experience. They're asking for 20 years of specific experience. They're asking for, have you done this lately? Yes, you've got to have the background, but what have you actually delivered? So I encourage my professional resume writers to think about how we communicate that. One, if you're going to talk years, make sure it lines up with what the job description is asking for. So we don't necessarily need to pick a random number or think that 10 is as much as we could put, or 20. Look at the job descriptions the person is targeting. See what makes sense in terms of the number of years you might communicate. Then please don't have that as your lead sentence. It's not the differentiator for anybody, right? Everyone who is qualified for the job is going to have X years of experience. Everyone is. So I wouldn't lead with that. Lead with what differentiates your candidate and adds value to the audience. Sit back and think about that. How does my client's unique value, what they do differently, the background they have, the experiences they've had, the accomplishments they've created, what about that is most differentiating, most unique, and most connected to the audience's desires, their needs, their pains? That's what I want the leading line to be, and I can almost guarantee you it will never be years of experience. If you feel compelled to put the years of experience in there, make sure it's specific. So if they're asking for a specific amount of years doing something specific, align with that specificity. Don't be generic. And when at all possible, phrase it in terms of value, not just experience. So instead of 20 years of creating courses, maybe it's 20 years of year-over-year growth in enrollment. So you see the difference. It's not just doing something. Everybody can do things. Everybody can write down. Everybody has had a job description before. We want to talk about what you've actually accomplished, produced, delivered, hopefully in line with what we know people actually care about. And that's what we care about. The value that you've delivered, the amount of time you've been doing that, and your results in creating it. So we want to move away from kind of the years of experience as a qualifier, and tell me what you've done in those years. Tell me how it's specific to what they're asking for. Align it to their needs, their pains, their desires, and make sure that you are phrasing that in a way that aligns with the job description. I did a poll, I don't know, maybe 18 months ago now, asking recruiters especially if they liked having the years of experience in the profile. And more of them said yes than I thought. So I had to kind of take a step back, because before I was very anti putting any years in there. Some of them liked it. So if you want to do that, go ahead, but make sure it aligns with the job description and talk about it in terms of value, not just in terms of years of experience. That's a commodity. Everybody's got it. Talk about what they did in those years that will move the needle with their reader. That's what we want to do. Okay, now thinking about how do we decide how far back to go in a resume? Now, I did a poll on this today just to get the conversation going. Thinking about, of course, it depends, right? It depends. How far do you want to go back? First of all, what is the job description asking for? What will the person's competition likely be? And who is their audience? So this is that piece where it really doesn't matter if my client has 30 years of experience. It matters, what does the audience really look for and what do they value? Because when you're talking about different types of companies, they're going to value different things. So even if I'm going for a CEO position or a board level position, I really need to think about the audience and what is that audience and what are they looking for? Because if I'm 60 and I make that very clear on my resume and I think, well, I'm going for a CEO or a board position, so that's fine. Maybe not. Thinking about industries, especially young companies, startup companies, you might think, oh, they'd value that experience. But I know many of us, that's not what we've experienced, is that you still have to find this happy medium in terms of the experience you share and how you'd fit with their culture. And on paper, you don't want them to discount you because they can calculate your age and think you aren't going to fit with their culture. Although maybe you don't want to work there. But if you do, you want to think about how you can align with that. So if I'm 60, I might not want to spell out all of those dates for some companies, even at those highest level of roles, if I'm looking at the industry, their culture, and how it's going to be the best fit. Now, on the other hand, when I've got more traditional companies, more traditional industries, that it might not be as much of a problem. But I still go back to the research, which shows age discrimination starts at age 45. And I know that even if I'm applying for a CEO level role in those roles, that if I'm dated on paper much older than 55, the average executive was 56, the data shows. So if my dates calculate to more than that, I'm still opening myself up for discrimination, even at those highest level of roles. So there's some other things we can do that help bring this all together and put it into what we can do with it. Ooh, so what if someone has been in the same job for 30 years? Likely, well, hopefully there's some nuance there that we can do to make this work. So let's see here, and I'll answer some of these questions. Love it. Okay, so let's start with the long career. And some of these that I'm going to be showing today are from our 90-minute session that we did last week. Adrian, Tom, and I did a session last week, and we were able to show some of these examples. So I'm going to show a few of those examples today and some of the ways that we handle it when someone's been at a place for a long time. So here's one, and this is actually Adrian's example. Adrian Tom submitted this example. She's an excellent resume writer. I'll drop her information later. She helped me provide this session last week. Let me see if I can find the right thing. All right, here we go. So this example from Adrian shows someone who's worked at the same company for a long time, 2001 to present. So not quite 30 years, but this same tactic is one you can use for that 30-year work history. You have a choice up here at the top to decide whether or not you put the full date range there or not. If I had been at this company for 30 years, I would probably opt not to include this full date range here. And instead, I'd put the date under each experience. Now, what this does is it prevents that 30-year history from glaring people in the face being the first thing they see when they look at your work history. And instead, they can go down and they can see each job. And you see that Adrian did a great job of spelling out the different areas of that person's leadership to separate it out, make it flow a little better. Even though it's a long amount of time, it's structured so that it's easy to read. Then we've got this additional experience back here with the dates for the older job. Now, you could even list other positions without the dates to show that full experience, but then you'd only have a certain amount of dates on the page, and then the older experience without dates so that you could have that full picture, not have to raise the red flag of the gap. To me, it's just a win-win. So instead of putting all the dates to age myself, I can do this. I don't have to put nothing that has that weird gap and someone wonders what I was doing for the 20 years before that. It gives me an option. I'm going to scroll up and find one other, I'll stop sharing so you don't have to see me scroll, but I'm going to find one other example of the different ways that you can handle this. And Adrian and I really didn't mean to do this, but we ended up with several awesome examples in this setting last week where we showed the different ways you can do early career experience, which was it was a session about executive resumes. So it wasn't too surprising that we had people that have a long career and want to figure out how do you handle that older work experience when you don't necessarily want to put the dates. It may not be relevant, right? So you've got that opportunity to really separate it out, be specific when you need to be, but not give every single little detail when you don't need to. And it gives us the example to do that. So sometimes you might have an older experience that is really relevant, and so you want to pull it in, and you can do that. And sometimes you've got older experience that maybe just needs to be summarized, and we can do that as well. So I'm going to pull up one of these other examples that was a favorite of Adrienne, but it was actually written by Alexis Binder. I'll drop her information as well. And what she did at the end of the resume, which is another option, and you could do this with if you had a long history at one company, or this happens to be an example of a different company, but you get an opportunity to just put in some of that additional experience at the end. So this resume did go back to 1997 with the dates. It's like right on that edge of as old as I would want to go for pretty much any level of individual, that mid 90s and above. But then you've got the additional experience here so that when that person walked in the door and they were whatever age they are, you don't feel like there's this huge gap between what you see and who they are on paper. I love this opportunity, and we see it in many different ways, but just to communicate that older experience without the dates, you can put a little bit of information there that might either show a high profile company or a great achievement. So you've got some space there where you can put in some wins without the dates, because you've already got enough dates. You don't need to go any further back. And again, you're going to make that decision on how far to go back based on the industry you're targeting, kind of those natural breaks in your career history, and weighing the pros and cons between how far back do I go, knowing that your bias will start around 45. So any more years you show beyond that could open that door. And we just have to weigh the pros and cons in terms of showing that older experience. Is it worth opening that door for the challenge of age bias? Okay, let me see if yes, Gail says it's not wise to attempt to shave off too many years. They'll see, you're right. There's got to be this balance. So I like to find that happy medium, maybe having the person look to be 45 or so on paper, which gives you 20 years, around 20 years of experience. If they're in that 50s to 60s age range, you might even do a little bit more. It just is going to depend on where that natural break is in their career. Yeah, so totally different topic, but I'll circle back around to that one if we have a moment. And LinkedIn, yes. So if I'm on LinkedIn, let me bring up that example that we were looking at. Don't mind my scroll here. So that example we were looking at where you have the full dates. So you wouldn't have to put that full date in LinkedIn. You could just put each individual company position in LinkedIn. So you didn't have to go back to the very beginning at that company on LinkedIn. So if the person had any kind of role change, job title change, you get to decide where you might cut that off on LinkedIn so that you don't have to put all of it in. If you've got an impressive company or something, you either have to decide, do I put it in LinkedIn and connect it to the company, which is then going to force me to put in dates, or I could put it like at the end of my summary, talk about the company and my early experience there without dates, but it's not going to connect to the company profile like it would if I put in the dates themselves. So we have to make some of those decisions in terms of the pros and cons, what really matters, what fits in and wows in the story versus what opens that door for age discrimination, and where do I find that middle ground. Yeah, so when you're working with someone that's got gaps, we've got a whole session on gaps. You just want to be careful when you're combining things. I love to combine things when we've got one role with maybe a few different companies or staffing agencies. You can do that. We just can't stretch the truth. So if they worked 3 months out of that 3 years, that's going a little too far. You'll have to make that decision based on what was actually going on during that time. To make what works. You can put maybe that general heading and then the specific companies with more specific dates so that it doesn't feel like you're being dishonest. And that's kind of the fun of resume writing, right? Is that we figure out what works and what doesn't work for that client, and how can we be truthful while still packaging the information in a way that brings the focus where we want to bring it, which is those relevant accomplishments, the relevant information, not the dates, not the here, there, and everywheres. We want the focus to be on the accomplishments, the stories. And so whatever you can do to build your format that way while still being honest, do it, right? If we can find a way to group information and really make that the information the highlight instead of the here, there, and everywhere, then I would find a way to do that. Excellent. Okay. And then when you're having a client that's self-employed, one, you want to think about what roles really fit for them. So going from self-employment to a job, how are they going to best plug in? What are their best accomplishments in self-employment? And then how can you build a resume that doesn't highlight necessarily as much of the entrepreneurial piece, but that role that they played in their company that now they want to play in the companies that they're targeting. We've got to build that story for them of being a great salesperson or being a great operations person or whatever it might be that is their new focus. Our job is to highlight those pieces of their accomplishments in running their own business and make sure that that's the focus so that someone can see them plugging into their business in that role. And we all know, if we're entrepreneurs, that entrepreneurs do a little bit of everything. So it's just kind of slicing and dicing it and really highlighting the pieces that are relevant to the person's target and making sure that we can build that story strong, or helping them pick the most relevant role based on the stories that they can tell. And, usually the communication about why you're putting a business on hold would happen more in an interview, maybe in a cover letter. On the resume, we're really just sticking to, this is why I'm focused. These are the skills, not why I'm focused. This is my focus. These are the skills, accomplishments I have that show I'm qualified for that role, and making that case so that it's obvious I can do the job. And then speaking to, ready for a new challenge, all the positive reasons that they might be looking for a new opportunity, just like with any job seeker who's looking to make a change. So hopefully that's helpful. We'll circle back around to that some other time. So we are getting ready to do our Academy Certified Resume Writing course, where we have an opportunity to really dive deep in how you get great information, great stories that show your clients are qualified and also unique in their qualifications and positioning to shine, to stand out, to connect to the employer's needs and make it to the top of the stack. That's what we want to help our clients do when it comes to the resume, of course. So if you're interested in joining that, you can join it live starting on Thursday, live virtually through Zoom, or you can do it self-paced, which means you get to watch the recordings and go along. Biggest part of this program is that you get individualized feedback on 5 writing projects so that you can grow as a writer as you continue in the program. We've crafted case studies for you. So it's someone who's transitioning roles, someone who's transitioning industries, and then some case studies where you get to choose. So we can grade you not just on your writing and the design, but also in your ability to connect the strategy to what the candidate's trying to achieve. And I love watching people grow during the program. We have an amazing team that gives feedback on the work. And we also get together quarterly and talk about challenges or questions that people have in their resume writing practice, and office hours that I do every week that current students and graduates can come into. So I think I saw one of our graduates, bring me that example on a Wednesday. I do office hours every Wednesday. Bring me that example and let's chat through it, because that's a lifetime benefit for you as an Academy certified resume writer. No renewals, no recertification. You're part of our community and our family forever. And we're always here to serve you. So Liz, jump on in, jump on in some Wednesday, bring me that example and let's chat through it. So I look forward to seeing you next week. We're going to be talking with Susan Critton about kind of the coaching side of branding, and not just ageism, but other challenges that people might face, and how personal branding can really help with the positioning and the confidence for them to achieve their goals. So we'll be back with the now, the new, and the next Tuesday. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.